Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR, and today we have a very, very special guest. This is a young man who's made his living betting on sports for the last decade. He's the confirmed, undisputed third best sports bettor in the world, as we found out at the sadly controversial DraftKings Sports Betting National Championship. He has a dog's name, as he's often reminded by Jeff Ma. Of course, it is Rufus Peabody. Rufus, how's it going?
Rufus Peabody. Jeff is never going to let that go.
Oh, man. Okay, if you're interested in Rufus's background, I interviewed Rufus about a year ago on Daily Fantasy Edge Pod. If you go to episode 261, you can hear about that. How he went to my arch rival TC Williams High School. I went to WT Woodson, and their school embarrassed us repeatedly. You can hear about how Rufus went to Yale and then wasted his genius brain and Yale degree by betting on sports every day for the last 10 years. But anyways, episode 261 if you want to hear about that. Today,
I would say I did the best I could with my brain, which is in a smaller market. I couldn't cut it with the big boys, so I had to go to sports betting.
Anyways, we're going to skip all that background stuff today and mostly focus on some current issues. Again, if you want the background, episode 261 on Daily Fantasy Edge. I want to start with a little bit of Corona stuff. I haven't talked about Corona on here at all because I'm just not a scientist. I am not a doctor. I don't really have any hot Corona takes. I did find it super interesting that so many DFS guys and so many sports betting guys, first of all, they think they're experts all of a sudden in esports and stock trading and oil futures and, Russian ping pong and epidemiology too, right? But I get it to some degree. Like if you have experience taking a set of data and modeling it, well, you can do that in theory with anything. So I'm curious if you had thoughts of trying to model Corona, what you thought of all the people in the sports betting and DFS community that were coming out with all their takes based on the models that they were trying to do with Corona. And I also found it interesting that like the public, this is like a lot of people didn't even know what, statistical modeling was. And now they see it and how it's affecting kind of policy and stuff like that with Corona. So I'm just curious to get your take on how all that went in the community.
Well, the problem now is that the models don't go as forecasted, which they're all probabilistic forecasts anyway. People are starting to dismiss models in general, statistical modeling. But first off, though, thank you for having me back. I love Establish the Run. I thought what you guys are doing is absolutely fantastic. The content's great. It actually helped me get second in my fantasy football league, and I'm not the best fantasy football player. I tend to overvalue my own players, and I don't wake up at 4 a.m. to get the first free agents after the waiver wire, after waivers have cleared, like other people in my league. So, but Establish the Run is fantastic. And
appreciate you.
Yeah. Regarding coronavirus, I think it's a lot easier to criticize models than it is to model yourself. And I think I've firmly been in that camp. It looks like it's a lot of work, but I think there are some lessons from trying to model coronavirus or seeing other people model coronavirus. I think the first one is you need to know what question you're answering. So is the model projecting what's going to happen if there are social distancing measures in place, if governments just continue to, take a laissez-faire approach, or which, that was back in March or something. So just saying, oh, this is what's going to happen. Like what are the assumptions behind that? The second, and I think this is really important, is to understand the data you're working with. So similar to sports, you need to contextualize it. Data coming out of China is not the same as data coming out of the US, and there's different states in the US that are testing people under very different criteria. So in some cases, more people being tested. We know that as more people are tested, there's more confirmed positive cases, but in some states, maybe more people being tested is as a result of more people actually getting sick. And in others, it might be just that there are more tests available. So there's things like that. And that's very similar to sports. If you were looking just at raw, like box score data, the stats like for NFL last year, and you saw that San Francisco Washington game in the rain, that was, I think there was like maybe 10 points total scored, and it was just ugly. You'd think, wow, these are really bad offenses and really good defenses, like Redskins all-star defense right there. But it was like pouring down rain and 25-mile-an-hour winds, and so you need to put it in context, and you got to do the same thing with the data. But I think with coronavirus, the problem is it's just so hard because there's so much we don't know. We don't know what actually is going on in China. We don't know, or Russia, or some of these countries that they have incentives to make themselves look good, and I mean that's an issue in the U.S. too. I mean, I saw someone in Florida who was sort of in charge of the sort of data system there got fired because she didn't want to censor the data. So I mean, I think so I think it's really hard. So you have to make a lot of assumptions. And then the third thing I'd say is your modeling choices need to make logical sense. So if you decide to fit something with a local polynomial, like that sort of cubic model that has been widely panned, and then extrapolate from that, that doesn't really make a ton of sense. It just, well, not to get all nerdy, but just the local polynomial. I mean, you're basically fitting all these little curves, but then it's saying, well, we're going to continue this last one out in this direction. And I know, I forget who it was on Twitter, but someone said with their cubic model, they showed that they modeled the Bills to win 17 games this season and some other team to win negative number of games based on their previous season wins total. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense to extrapolate there, but so your modeling choices just should need to make logical sense. Like you don't need to be able to, I don't know, write some proof of why this regression works, but you need to intuitively understand the methodology you're using and sort of what it should be used for.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned about assumptions is like, I think about in football all the time because like, people made fun of me or were critical of me for playing teams that are, I'm like the only one posted in the high stakes lobby playing teams that are quote unquote, 5 points off optimal. Right. And my thing is you're basing what is quote unquote optimal off of a set of assumptions that I might not agree with. Right. Because you're using like, Josh Jacobs, target share at a place where I disagree with it. And then all of a sudden it's super sensitive. If I reduce that by 50% or if I reduce it by even 30%, then all of a sudden what I have is optimal and what you have isn't. So is there a way when you're modeling, I guess, to make it not so sensitive with coronavirus, with football, with everything? It just seems like that's a huge thing that I see is that if I change this one little thing, all of a sudden I'm getting completely different outcomes.
That's a really good point you make. And I think it really gets to understanding the uncertainty in something and what's driving it. And so if you change certain assumptions with coronavirus modeling, you see deaths change from like, 100,000 to like 500,000,
right.
And that's, so understanding sort of in terms of the orders of magnitude. And so honestly, when I model stuff, I will sometimes try to, like, especially with football, like running season simulations or something like that. The NFL, I might, I might tweak a parameter and then rerun things and sort of see how it shakes out, because you want to know where your edge comes from or why you're getting a result you are and sort of how sensitive it is. And I think it's huge for DFS, obviously, and for fantasy and for prop betting, because there are a lot of foundational assumptions there. And especially when you have injuries or someone stepping into a new role where nobody really knows exactly what role someone might play. And so, so I think you can get quite a wide variety of results based on that. And what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're capitalizing, you want to create leverage based on what you think is optimal and the differences between that and what everybody else thinks. So, so I like your strategy.
Yeah. So it's been 10 weeks without sports. What have you been up to? Has it been useful for you at all? Have you filed for unemployment? I mean, what's been going on for the last 10 weeks?
I don't know. Would I be allowed to file for unemployment?
There was like a case in Vegas. I couldn't believe it. They were letting like professional poker players who I guess had a history of, you have to document that you were winning on your taxes for the last few years to file for unemployment, which seemed crazy, but
I guess they could say, you're not unemployed. You can bet on Belarusian ping pong or whatever. So I bet on Jonathan Bale's push-ups, so I'm disqualified. So it's at the beginning, it was a little bit of it was a little nice to have a little bit of a break. I have a lot of things that I've wanted to work on, but just haven't really had time to. But the problem is, it's just been really, really hard to be efficient during this time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it is. Maybe just because I'm basically stuck in one place, and but for whatever reason, it's been hard to get that sort of mindset to be really productive. I've gone through some, I've had some spurts of productivity, and right now, I mean, I've been a little more productive. I'm working on some stuff with golf, with NFL. I'm finally starting to take a look at next season, and I have a few other sort of business venture things that are in the works that I'm spending some time on. But the nonprofit, the American Bettors Coalition, that's kind of on pause. We can't launch right now. I mean, nobody has money to fund anything right now. It would,
Mm-hmm.
So mostly, I still have plenty of work to do, and I'm not any less busy. I'm just, it's just, there aren't the negative consequences there aren't deadlines. That's the problem. So
Yeah. Oh, of course. I mean, God, deadlines create all action just for everything. All right. I want to move into kind of what the sports betting space looks like now versus a couple years ago, before Passbill was repealed, before all these states had legalized sports betting. I'm curious if your work has changed at all over the last 2 years since the United States, or at least some states, have been open for business in terms of sports betting.
So it hasn't changed as much as you would have thought, at least, or not in the way I think people would expect. I think the biggest change for me, I guess, well, it's sort of brought what I'm doing out of the shadows, and it's become more socially acceptable. And there are now sports betting businesses in the United States. I mean, like, I guess Action Network launched before PASPA was repealed. But I mean,
Yep.
They obviously benefited from that. And then the other big change has just been the fact that I've done a lot more media stuff in the last, I guess, the last 2 years for sure, which I don't know how much. I think a lot of that does have to do with the fact that there's more appetite for sports betting content now. I mean, you have VSiN, you have a lot of, I mean, you have all these different sort of affiliate sites like the US Bets and Legal Sports Report and all that are providing sports betting content. And I guess there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of people out there that, I guess, do what I do publicly. And hell, I was not public for a long time. But I think for me, I mean, just having that sort of the Massey-Peabody analytics, the rating systems that we developed, started back in 2010. I think that, I guess, has given me some sort of track record, but it wasn't really intentional.
Yeah. I mean, no, I think people assume that all of a sudden you're going to find all these extremely soft lines. You're going to get to bet so much more because it's legal in the United States now. I don't think people realize, and we'll get to the ecosystem and your problems with the European model and all that in a minute here. But I think people assume that all of a sudden it's just like so much easier for you to print money because it's legal in the United States. I'm just not sure that's the case, unless maybe I'm wrong.
I think there are plenty of soft lines out there. The problem is being able to get down there and not get tossed or limited. Right. So, there are opportunities. Obviously, you need to be in the particular states to bet there. So the fact that I'm spending a good amount of time now in Boston doesn't really help me there. But it's I have a network of people and all that. But it's and so there are opportunities that are coming out of it. But I think that it's interesting. I mean, I've heard arguments from people that the market is going to become less efficient now because you're going to have more public bet action. I tend to think, I think that easier access to sports betting from people who might not have been interested in betting otherwise. I think there's a good portion of smart people out there, some nerds out there who might say, well, oh, look, there's all these opportunities. It's something that's legal that might not have looked at it before. Yeah. They don't want to find a street bookie. They don't want to, use Bovada or whatever. And so, but I think the markets are going to get more efficient. But I do think there are opportunities along the way for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that was my thing. And I was wrong. I thought that anybody who wanted to bet was betting already, right? It was so easy to fire up an offshore account or to find a street bookie. I thought if you wanted to bet, you're betting already. But it's just anecdotally, it seems like there's way more interest and there's way more people betting now just because it's legal. It's like, I don't really see what the difference is. I guess I do to some degree, but man, there's definitely more people interested. And I know, like, I mean, I Bet the Process is probably like the only podcast that I actually listen to every single. I don't miss any episodes for, and it seems like
you
you
don't just
guys.
have to say that, Adam.
No,
I'm really bonus points.
I'm really not, but I feels like you guys are getting bigger. The podcast is getting bigger on the heels of legalization too. So it just seems like that's the case. I don't know if that's true or not.
I think it certainly helped, but I think it's also, I mean, we've definitely grown. But I think that I feel like we have more of a vocal group of people that follow it, I guess. But it's still, I think, such a niche podcast though. I mean, I think that there's, I don't know what the sort of growth potential is for something like that. It's nothing like what you guys are doing and Establish the Run.
Yeah. Well, obviously there's way more people that play fantasy football than want to talk, kind of in a nerdish way about betting on sports. It just is what it is. But that said, the people who are into it are super, super, super into it. And I think that shows for sure. Speaking of the podcast, you've been outspoken on the podcast about exposing quote unquote touts in the sports betting world, right? Like you went after Schwimmer and all that. I get it. I do. And I think people appreciate it. What I always wanted to interject, whenever you were arguing with Jeff and them about it, what I wanted to say is, shouldn't there be, and maybe you disagree, shouldn't there be some level of personal responsibility, right? Like some people need to just have accountability. Like if you're dumb enough to pay for a ping pong play from Vegas Dave, like, don't you just deserve to go busto? Like, is it really up to you or me or us to protect these people from giving their money to Vegas Dave?
No, I think you make a good point, but I do think it's a slippery slope too. Let's say someone calls you and says they're the IRS and you owe money, like, and you're, my 96-year-old grandma, and she's like, oh my God, this didn't happen, but and sends money. I mean, does she deserve to lose that money? I mean, you could say, well, yeah, she was dumb enough to believe this person, but I mean, at the same time, I mean, I think that I think you need to do what you can to sort of protect the people that are the vulnerable people that are gullible, and the thing is, you and I understand this industry. We've been around it for a long time, but I do think there's a lot of people that don't understand what is and isn't possible in sports betting. I mean, hell, there's people that think, oh, you can win 80% of the time, or that some games are fixed, and this person actually knows that the game's fixed. So I'm going to buy picks from them. And so I think you learn quickly, or you should learn quickly, hopefully, from buying picks that, wow, this person actually won half of their picks, yet they're still proclaiming that they're on this 9-2 heater or something. And, something doesn't feel right here. But I think what I want to do is just educate people. Although the problem is the people that I'm educating are the people that, well, the people that are listening to Bet the Process or follow me on Twitter probably, are not the people that are going to be buying picks from touts that say they hit 80% anyway. So,
right.
But in general, I mean, I think what the average person may not understand is that the economics don't really work for selling picks unless you don't provide value in selling picks. It's a marketing game. It really is. Because if you provide value with your picks, you're going to be moving lines, and your average customer, they see the pick, it is already going to move, because you'll have people out there, people with the trading sophistication of a Spanky or something, that'll have a bot that'll be able to automatically bet that game immediately when the pick's released. And if you're getting sloppy seconds, you're not going to be profitable. So I mean, I think you've seen Right Angle Sports, which is one of the only sort of honest guys out there in that space, in my view. They've run into it's very difficult for them to actually you can't really scale something like that, because and they've gone to great lengths to try to make it so that their subscribers are able to get down at their release prices, but it is super difficult, and I don't think they would be doing this if they didn't get other benefits from it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And that's why, I mean, we're going to talk about some peer-to-peer stuff in a minute, but I think, I mean, for me, I've always been way more into the peer-to-peer poker and DFS than I am trying to beat a market like sports betting for the reasons that you said. I mean, the peer-to-peer stuff is just so much better to me. You
I love
mentioned,
peer-to-peer. I think
yeah,
it's the future.
right. And I do want to talk about that in a second in relation to the DK sports betting thing. I did want to stick with one more thing about the ecosystem. Like, you've been obviously outspoken about the business model kind of employed by William Hill and Canby and these other European model books. And the model, as Rufus alluded to, is essentially if you show any sign of being sharp at all, like any sign, you're limited to like $10 a bet or you're banned altogether. And I know that Jeff, your co-host Jeff Ma is kind of sick of this conversation, right? And I get where he's coming from. They're running a business. They only want donkeys in there, betting on parlays and favorites and overs. And that's why they're happy to pump up stories like parlay pats and all the other nonsense, all these other big parlays that hit. So I do see that side of it for them, right? It's just easier. It's just less risky to only take square money. I think the point that you make is the best one though. Like, the books are costing themselves so much action by assuming someone is sharp too quick. Like, I am not sharp at all at betting sides, but I bet some props, I bet some WNBA, and next thing you know, I can't bet like anywhere more than $10 just because like I can't even, I know nothing about MMA, and now I'm limited to $10 betting an MMA side. I was just looking for a sweat like last week because I happened to bet some props and some WNBA. But anyways, I guess my main point is that they're losing out on like the aspirational thing, right? Like, people want to say, hey, I want to really get really good at this, like Rufus. But the problem is, if I do get really good at this, I'm not even gonna be able to bet. So like, I see both sides of it. I'm not sure what there is to do about it though, because I don't see a lot of these European, no matter how much we complain, they're just gonna, say their side of the story, which is, a lot of it's not true. And I'm not sure it's gonna change at all.
Yeah, they're gonna say it's all false.
Right.
All these people are liars. You shouldn't trust them about anything. What
Yeah,
do they do? What do they do for society? They gamble.
Yeah, so I don't really have a question, but I don't know. I know that Jeff is sick of talking to you about it. I just want to give you one more chance to talk about it, and I know you're in favor of the exchange system. I just think that we're probably further away from that than you want, unfortunately.
Well, the exchange thing, I think part of it is just legal hurdles. With the Wire Act, it's until the Wire Act comes down, it's not going to be a really viable business model either. I mean, I think potentially on sort of the B2B side, it could be valuable in terms of offloading risk. But overall, I mean, I do think, so I think that it makes sense. I mean, these books are private businesses. So there's the argument that they should be able to restrict who does and doesn't bet. And just like any other business, and that makes sense. But, and personally, I do think they're costing themselves money by not, as you said, by actually limiting people that may not be winners. And I think that there's a lot of people that are better than coin flippers, but not good enough to actually win. And I think, I think you're not only losing the business, but I think there's some that loss in terms of branding as well. But so I think the whole free market argument, I think that's justifiable. But the thing is, sports betting in the United States is not a free market. The government is deciding how many licenses are available and who gets those licenses. And so, so I think, to me, and I don't know, obviously, legally, how this would hold up, but to me, it doesn't seem fair. Like, what about in a state like New Hampshire, where DraftKings has monopoly? If they say, we don't want your action on, beyond $5 on insert bet type here, where are you going to bet it? You can't. I mean, it's almost as if like a drug company develops some drug and they're the only ones that have it. And they say, you know what, you might have this disease, but we're not, we've decided we don't want blonde haired people to have this drug because we have brown hair, or I don't know. So it's, I mean, I think that obviously that's not an exact parallel or anything like that, but I mean, to me, it seems like if the government's involved in that whole sort of free market justification doesn't really fly as much. But overall, so I'm a proponent of the sort of the Pinnacle model of take on all comers, use the information you get from sharp bettors to be able to make a sharp price and be able to sort of entice arbitrage action with recreational books to pump up volume. And I think it's a difficult model to make work. And I know there's a lot of people out there that disagree with me on this, I think. But my point is that I think that there is an underserved population of bettors, and I think that's what you need to capitalize on. And honestly, like in the future, I think an exchange model is the best. I mean, because let's say, look, let's say I want to bet 50,000 on some NFL side, but I've been booted out of all these other places, and there's somebody else that wants to bet 50,000 on the other side, and he's not allowed to bet in these places either. Like it just boggles my mind that somehow we're not able to do a transaction there, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not all sharps are on the same side of every bet. So, I mean, to me, it just logically, I'm like, how, like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, yeah.
I know. Yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, obviously, if you've ever been to like the counter at William Hill and stuff like that, you can tell that they're not ready to take on the Pinnacle model. I know that's not the guys making decisions, but still, it's still funny down there.
But I do think I'm very bullish on Circa and what they're doing. We had Matt Metcalf on Bet the Process last week, and Matt is very sharp. He was a professional bettor as well before. He was a bookmaker, then a bettor, then a bookmaker again, and he believes very much in that model. Because he wants to book the way he wants his book to cater to be, well, he books like a bettor basically. He wants an experience that he wants to have a book that he would want to bet at. And so,
but he also made the point that he doesn't want to lose money, right? So he can take the sharpest action and still make money. It's just the way that you do it and the way you use the information that you get, I think. But that's a sophisticated person running the book, and a lot of people would argue a lot of people running these books aren't nearly as sophisticated as Matt. Okay, I wanted to mention DK Sports Betting. It's so funny, I was just joking, obviously, on Twitter. I said, confirmed undisputed third best sports bettor in the world. That was a reference to the DK Sports Betting Championship.
And everybody on Twitter, right?
In the United States. And these people on Twitter, there's obviously so many trolls in the sports betting Twitter. They're like, he's not the third best sports bettor. All that we were joking about is, and I was in it too, I guess it was called the DraftKings Sports Betting National Championship. Rufus finished third. Unfortunately, it was controversial in the end because Rufus didn't get his bets graded in time to make a bet that could have allowed him to win first place. But third place was still a nice payday. It's sad that it's really sad to me that it ended controversially, because I thought it was an awesome event. Like, this is the way sports betting actually interests me. I'm really not that interested in betting sides and stuff like that, but this peer-to-peer and kind of tournament style stuff that DraftKings did, basically you got $5,000 and whoever ran it up the highest at the end won the tournament. And I thought it was really cool. I'm curious, I know you had a bad experience at the end, but what do you think of that event as a whole? And is there room? I know there's room. Do you have any other ideas for other cool peer-to-peer stuff that these platforms could offer?
No, I loved the event overall, obviously, or the idea of it. Obviously my experience at the end, I wasn't happy with that, but I think it was a fantastic idea. Although I do think there are going to be issues, I do think there are issues in terms of the potential for collusion. I mean, I know people, I found out later that there was, I was up against some groups of like 10 or more entries together. And I know some of these people were like, they were going to have they were going to have a DraftKings Spring Sports Betting Championship back in March. And I was approached by some people being like, hey, do you want to join up? And that the thing is, I wasn't going to enter this year for the reason that I don't want to, I feel like I don't want to be in one of these groups just because that's against everything I stand for, right? I mean, I want it to be a fair playing field. And the thing is,
and it was against terms of service too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's against the terms of service, but how do you enforce something like that?
No, I know you can't.
And I reached out to John Aguiar about it, and he was like, we're investigating these things, blah, blah, blah. Like, if you can give an anonymous tip or whatever. I'm not going to do that, but no, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but like, I understand people are trying to exploit edges, and there's honestly, the ethical line is different for different people. And, but I think, to me, I think if you want to create a system that basically makes it so that doesn't come into play, right? Yeah. And so it's just, it's so hard to sort of figure out that collusion. like you could have 10 people that are friends that enter and and they don't look at each other's entries. They just want to split variance. That's one thing. But if you're saying, hey, I'll hit this side, I'll play this big underdog. You play this big other underdog. You play the other big underdog, and then I'll parlay the three favorites together. One of those is going to be a really, is going to hit big.
Yeah.
Right. And so as an individual, you're at a big disadvantage against a group acting, making a concerted effort together like that. So the question is, how do you deal with something like that? Because I do think the idea, the event was great. I mean, I think it is, there's game theory. It's like, I mean, I love games, and there's, different approaches, and, I'm sure, you weren't in it, were you?
I was, yeah.
You were, okay.
Yeah.
But did your strategy evolve? I mean, did you go in with one particular strategy and stick to it, or did you sort of change based on what everybody else was doing?
Yeah, I think I thought too much about what everybody else was doing, and maybe that's right. I don't know. I have the same issues in DFS as I do in the tournament. I was just like, I know what's a good bet. I know when I was beating the market, and like when there were late scratches in NBA where you could have gotten player props off at a really good price and stuff like that. And I was like, well, everybody's going to have that, so there's not really a lot of upside in taking it. But in hindsight, like I should have just been trying to like run up money early and then thought more about game theory at the end. I think was maybe right. I don't know though.
I was surprised that you didn't have more people just trying to risk it, like basically put all $5,000 down at like something that was like 50-1,
and just try to win it with one bet.
The problem was DraftKings wasn't taking those bets at that size. Right. I don't think they were allowing something that would win $250,000, unfortunately.
Right.
Which if the game was play money, if it was just like tournament money, like World Series of Poker or something like that, then it would be a little more interesting from a game theoretical perspective. But I think the fact that you got to actually keep your bankroll as a live bankroll did create opportunities, because I think there was some risk aversion that came into play for some people.
Oh yeah.
But the way the prize pool was structured, though, it made sense to, the EV was going for first.
Yeah. A lot of people tried to like double up, like get it all in, and then try to like get a roll that way. But yeah, I don't know. There were so many different strategies. I don't know. I hated the way I played it.
I mean, I liked the way I played it, but obviously I got lucky too.
Yeah, well, of course. That's everything.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Right.
But in regards to the collusion thing, I mean, I think that some people have drawn a parallel with, or you could draw a parallel with what's going on in DFS in general. And with the bachelorette, whatever it was, contestant and
Bachelorgate.
Yeah, Bachelorgate. To me, I don't I understand why. I understand how bad the optics are, but to me, like, look, the DFS thing. I mean, sure, okay. There's a limit of 100. What is it? 150.
150.
Yeah.
Yeah. 150. Yeah.
My first, like, if I'm entering in one of these tournaments, my first entry is going to have the most expected value. My second entry is going to have less expected value than that. And it's going to keep going down. And like, I mean, if if you think about it, if you had every entry in a contest, you'd be paying the rake, right? So in reality, it's actually, I think you are not, your, I guess, expectation, your ROI is going to go down the more entries you have.
Right.
So I don't think that there is that sort of, I don't think there's, yes, there's a benefit. If you're good, if you're a winner, you're able to get more money down. So that's, and I know that DraftKings and FanDuel are trying to make the ecosystem friendly for recreational bettors, or what are DFS, recreational DFSers, the minnows, if you will. And so, and that's why you have those limits. But at the same time, I mean, to me, it's not, and so that does matter, but I don't think to the degree, I don't think you have the sort of same fairness issue, or at least to the same level as you would with a contest like the DK Sports Betting Championship. Yeah,
the number of combos is just so high, and I would be willing to bet against 99.9% of DFS players that their 300th lineup, that their 250th lineup is actually going to be plus EV. I think the conversation is a little bit different. I think if you say, well, all the money's in first place, so if I can fire in 300 entries, my overall expectation is lower, but my chances of getting first, like randomly being first, are actually better, right? I don't know.
I guess it's like the not having duplicate lineups, right?
Right.
But
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, I want to get into some actual betting stuff that hopefully I can use, that hopefully people can use. One of my favorite recent episodes was when you guys talked about your Super Bowl props and how you got to those, how you bet, and everything. I think kind of like the simplest way, the props 101 way, would just be to get a median projection on everybody's stats. You know, Raheem Mostert's rushing yards is this, and if I find it's X% off of this, I'm going to bet it. I assume that your process for betting props is more sophisticated than that in terms of finding a range of outcomes over a lot of simulations for a player, or maybe it's not. But can you give the people any insight on how to bet props in a more sophisticated way?
so it's interesting. You talk about the median projections, and so I actually tend to target a mean projection, and then I translate it to a median. But because I'm projecting a bunch of, I'm basically it's sort of, well, I guess it's both tops down and bottoms up in a way. It's bottoms up in the fact that it's using the micro level data, but it's tops down in the fact that, like, if I'm trying to project Raheem Mostert rush attempts, first I'm projecting how many plays
Sure.
the team's going to have, which is going to be based on like micro level data, but then what percentage of pass and rush, and all that kind of stuff, and getting down to, and then what's Raheem Mostert's, share of running back rushes, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different approaches you can take to it. I've basically stuck with, I guess, one general approach. I mean, I've made lots of changes over the years. These days I'm not betting props except for the Super Bowl. It's just very labor intensive. Because so I would say where you can get an edge is some of the stuff that you can't really model. Right. I mean, like, you can, I guess, have a framework for analyzing it. But like dealing with injuries, that's the biggest thing. Like, let's say if Michael Thomas was injured for a game for the Saints, like, what happens to do more balls go to the tight end? Does Taysom Hill play more? Like, and that's the kind of thing where you can kind of, I mean, I think knowing football can matter a lot. But at the same time, I found, like, at the same time, if you're able to sort of dissect it and figure out what the Saints were going to do, then their opponent would be able to do that too. So at the same time, maybe, Sean Payton's probably not, you might want to keep them guessing. So, I mean, you can go so deep with some of these things.
Sure.
And I think, I don't know if you wanted to, I don't know if you were, if you wanted me to talk about any like specific type of prop, but I mean, I think the biggest thing is looking, I mean, understanding the distributions of the things you're dealing with. If it's like number of field goals or number of receptions or whatever, how the mean and median are different generally. If I have most are projected for, mean of 40 rushing yards, his median is going to be lower than that.
Right. Yeah,
I wanted, it's going to come from the big rush, well, the really long rushes. But
yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask you about that because I think that's a huge mistake that people don't understand is median versus mean. What should we be using for our player props? You said you use mean, but shouldn't median be more effective when you're betting these yardage props and stuff?
I'm projecting, like, I have a projection that projects out the mean, but you're right. Like, what I'm placing my bets based off of medians. I guess what I'm saying is that the intent is not to model the median. Like, I'm not going through and saying, okay, Michael Thomas went over, he might have averaged, 90 yards, but he went, his median was 83 though. I'm still basing things generally off the fact that his average is 90. But in reality, what I'm doing is running simulations and saying, okay, this is, in this simulation, he had three receptions that went for 51 yards in this other one. So it ends up like, and if you can nail those distributions right, because there's going to be games there's going to be a game when he has like 17 receptions or something.
Yeah.
Then if you can get that right, then it'll be reflected in the simulations. The difficult thing there is trying to figure out injury probabilities. And that's something that I've thought a little bit about, more about sort of modeling that in recent years, but haven't really settled on the best way to do it. I mean, it's hard. I mean, obviously some players are more injury prone than others, but I don't have the data to model that,
Yeah.
I think. Because
it's super hard. But one thing you can say, I think, I mean, I try to lean unders. Like, it kind of pains me to bet like overs on a lot of these yardage props and reception props. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I feel like
That's right.
it's yeah. I mean, I feel like in-game injuries are not factored in, and also, as you said, median's always gonna be lower than mean, and a lot of these books are just putting up props like they'll just take Michael Thomas's average for the last 10 games, and that's their line, and they're not even thinking about median or context or anything. So I try to find mostly unders when I can. The problem is on a lot of these injury things, I find myself taking overs, right? So like you said, if a star player goes out, a lot of times I find myself on overs on the backup, and that's not always, doesn't always feel the best.
Well, there's upside, right? I mean, you're right. Like overall, unders like or 90+% unders and nos of my prop action is
Right.
But you're right. Like there are, an injury can only hurt Michael Thomas. It can't help him. If Alvin Kamara gets injured, it's probably not going to have much of an effect on Michael Thomas. Maybe a little bit, but not much. Whereas if you're, if you're betting on Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara gets hurt, that's going to have a big effect.
Yeah.
So I think understanding which way it can go, but I mean, if you look at sort of the effect of an injury, I mean, well, actually what I did this past year, I remember modeling out like having a series of wide receiver projections for like target shares based on if for the Super Bowl, if a particular receiver was injured. So it would be, if, number one receiver is injured, this is number, and then I would basically, and then I tried to assign a probability of this particular injury happening, and then said, okay, well, let's assume it happens. I'll assume it happens halfway through the game, just because this is a very basic thing I was doing. And so then I literally ran simulations with these different like injury factors, and then basically weighted them a certain amount. So to try to get a better sense, but it's still, I mean, it's very inexact. And it's the kind of thing that if I was doing this for every single NFL game, I would, I wouldn't sleep ever.
Yeah. And I wanted to make the point too that, like Rufus said, he's not betting player props at all until the Super Bowl. And that's one of the reasons that the lines are so exploitable in props, is because the limits are so low that a lot of people like Rufus aren't even messing around with them. So again, I know you talked about it last time. I talk about it all the time. I think a great introduction for fantasy players, if they want to get into sports betting and actually have a chance to win, is to bet props. And honestly, fantasy players have just like, I mean, especially good DFS players have like such a better feel for context of a situation and for median projections than I think a lot of other people do. So yeah, I still love player props.
Yeah, player props. I was betting player props before I developed. That was the first thing I bet.
I got to ask you, I know Josh Hermsmeyer, Frisco Josh. He works with us here at ETR, very opinionated, but he often has, I think, really good data and math to back it up. And one of his hottest takes that he ever spit out was that he went with the big headline that got everybody's attention: defense doesn't matter. That's not actually what he was saying. What he was saying is that when you are trying to project offensive players for a single week, he has not been able to find any model or data that shows that in a single game, when you're doing an offensive player's projection, that the matchup actually matters, because A, there's so much randomness in a single game, and B, because we don't actually know who the good defenses are until week 12, week 13, week 14, et cetera, et cetera. Do you buy this notion that defense is overrated when it comes to projecting player performance?
Oh, sort of yes and no. I mean, I think defense, in terms of projecting a game, defense does matter. And I think that there is a lot more, but for fantasy, I mean, there's so many other things that sort of dwarf that, right? Like game flow and all these other things. So I agree that, just saying, yeah. And overall, I mean, I agree with the gist of it. I think that, I do think it does matter a little. And I mean, if you said, okay, well, it doesn't matter in an individual game, but it matters for a whole season. Well, if it matters for a whole season, then it does matter for an individual game, right? I mean, because a season is the sum of 16 games.
Sure.
I just think, but you're right. It is hard to, especially early in the season. Yeah, it's hard to project. There's going to be a lot of regression to the mean in a lot of this stuff. I mean, I've looked at I don't know if you looked at wide receiver going up, or this team going up against number one wide receivers and things like that. I mean, I think there's a ton of noise in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The matchup stuff, I mean, it is hard because the matchup stuff is very different from team to team, because you have certain teams that are going to say, this is the way we play. We're going to ram it down your throat, regardless of what you do. And other teams say, okay, we're going to game plan to take away the strength of the other team. And maybe, if you're looking at data that says this team's really good against number one wide receivers, maybe that's because they gear up to stop the other team's best player. But this team happens to, have a tight end that's better. So, in a weaker number one receiver. So I think, you can go into a lot of detail. But overall, I agree with the point in general. I don't want to go on record saying that I agree with everything about it, but
yeah. Well, one thing I'll say is that we know for sure that defenses stats are not as sticky year to year as offenses. You know what I mean? Like, just because the team was great on defense last year is not nearly as sticky as offense being great year to year. So that's something I try to be conscious of as well, for sure.
Right. And the other thing is, I think you have some competing effects. So let's say you play a team, let's say you play a good defense, a team that's a good team, and you, if you're playing, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here a little bit, but if you're, game script matters a lot. And I think there's a correlation between game script and quality of a team in a way too.
Sure.
If you're playing from behind, if you're playing against a good defense, but playing from behind, you're going to, be airing the ball out a lot. You're going to be getting more yards, per play, just because you're going to be throwing the ball more. Right. And so,
sure.
I mean, I think it would be interesting is to sort of, if you control for sort of those correlations there, how does it look?
Yeah, for sure. All right. I want to get your take before we get to listener questions. I want to get your take on how, the public, not people who have simulations, not people who have models, just how the public can bet sides more reasonably. And I think it's easy to tell people, hey, just bet straight sides and you can't lose too much, just bet, the closing line on Pinnacle. And if you can beat that, if you can find a number that's off of that and you bet that, yeah, that's great. But that's not really what people want, right? They don't want to turn $110 into $100, right? That's not what people who are just betting for fun really want. And that's why people love the Millie Maker on DraftKings. They want to turn 20 into $1 million. That's why they want to bet parlays and stuff. It doesn't matter how much you tell them that it's statistically bad. They still want to do it because it's just for fun, right? So is there anything we can say to people like, hey, I'm going to bet parlays? Is there anything we can say to say, hey, here's how you could bet parlays more efficiently, and here's maybe some other things that you need to know that I can just I know that I'm kind of being a donkey, but it's fun, and I just want to not be as bad.
Well, parlays are interesting because they're not necessarily bad in and of themselves. I mean, assuming that books aren't assuming that you're getting the full payout as it should be multiplied out, meaning that if you have a teamer at minus 110 that you're getting plus 264 or whatever, and they're not rounding it down.
Right.
But overall, what a parlay is just going to do is it's going to magnify the house's edge or your edge. And so if you have an 8-team parlay, it's very unlikely that you have an edge overall with all 8 of those bets. Right. And so, I do think you're right. I don't think a $5 parlay bettor. The question is, someone that's betting a $5 parlay, if parlays weren't available, would they be betting more on a side bet? I don't know. But I do agree that people love the lottery mentality. And so
yeah,
I think that the problem is if you have an edge on each of the legs of a parlay, on each bet, a parlay is going to be your best EV solution because it's the magic of compounding, essentially.
Sure.
But it is just, with the odds that a recreational bettor has an edge overall on 8 particular bets is very low. And so as a result, you end up with this bet, where the house edge gets compounded. And so it's I think an 18 is 40% or something like that. ROI for the house.
Yeah.
And so, I think just think about it that way. And so if you're really confident on something, let's say, I think maybe a better way to do it, if there's fewer things you have to be right about, let's say you parlay 2 underdogs on the money line. You don't, I think there's probably more of a chance that you have an edge on both of those, then you have an edge on 8 separate legs of a parlay. But so I guess just be cognizant of the fact that you are compounding whether your own edge or the house edge, whichever one it is, when you're parlaying. But in terms of in terms of someone who's not running simulations and all that stuff, what they can do to be better. I mean, it's hard. The NFL side market is quite efficient, but I mean, I think the biggest thing I would say is sort of be contrarian in your thinking, and don't fall for the narratives. In a way, look at. I mean, I would say think about what like your little pea brain wants to do and do the opposite.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
whatever
I
the
would say like
heads are, if the talking heads are like hyping up something, be like, well, do I really believe that? Maybe the hype is greater than the reality.
Yeah, I always say like if I went to a bar and asked 100 people who's going to win X game on Sunday, and 99 of them say one thing, for sure the other side is the right side, and you know that's the whole idea of being contrarian. But I don't know, like that gets back into the whole idea of like reverse line movement, which I know you hate, and like all this other stuff that's just people are trying to figure out what the public side is and what the quote unquote sharp side is. It's just not that simple, right? So like I don't know, and I feel like the markets are getting more sophisticated too, where like a lot of times the home dogs are like the fake sharp side. It seems like, you know, like a lot of people think now that home dogs, they think they're super sharp and they're taking all home dogs. I feel like that's gotten less effective as it used to be, you know?
Well, in a way, if everybody's doing that, everybody's talking about the home dog is the thing to do, then maybe it isn't the thing to do. I'm not talking about the reverse line movement stuff. I'm just talking about the way you think about things. Almost like going into the last season, everybody was hyping up the Browns. They would continue this trend like they were the media darling. Well, it's like, well, you know, maybe what if that's not true?
Well, what do you think about the Bucks? This year's Bucks are last year's Browns. What do you think about them?
Oh, I think the hype's overblown for sure. I mean, I think Tom Brady, if you look at QBR last year, Tom Brady and Jameis Winston were interchangeable. I think they both they had the same QBR. Now, I don't know if I'm not saying that Winston is just as good as Brady necessarily, but also he's 40. Brady's 42.
43,
43. He could drop off a cliff at any moment. So it's personally, I still have the Bucks rated. I had the Bucks rated higher than the Patriots this year. Because I haven't figured out how to capture Bill Belichick. Apparently, my like having the quarterbacks in the model, but not a coaching thing. We're giving that. I guess in a way, I'm giving the Belichick effect to Brady, which isn't. I'm not saying that's right. And it'll be interesting to see how because this offseason you have a lot of older quarterbacks changing teams, especially. I mean,
that's
you have
true.
Rivers going to the Colts. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm kind of looking forward to it. Hopefully, we have a season.
Yeah, we did a win totals podcast, and I definitely am on Bucks under, especially if you can get 10 and not lay too much juice. But yeah.
Oh yeah, if you can get 10 under 10, that's great. Like I cranked out like an initial Massey-Peabody like simulation with because I'm in New Jersey right now, and there's some opportunities.
The only other thing I wanted to ask you about on just side betting, like when I first got into like sports and betting and just trying to follow it a little bit, this was like early 2000. Like I felt like home field was underrated by the market. And now it seems like it's swung the other way, where maybe home field is actually overrated. And I've heard you mention that about college football and maybe some other things. Have we gone the other way where the market's actually overrating home field now? And do you think games with no fans, how will you adjust to that in your model?
I think you're right. I think home field did used to be underrated. I mean, looking back, I remember the research I did on lines back in like the 90s and 2000s, all the literature I read back. I did a literature review on academic papers on sports betting and how it pertains to financial markets back in 2007 for an econ professor. And so I feel like I gained a lot of insight into market biases from that. But you're right. Home field advantage just in absolute terms has decreased over the years recently. And I think part of that is, travel's easier, the increased professionalization. You don't have the stadiums are nicer. I'm guessing you don't have like Wrigley Field visitors locker room situations as much anymore, right? Where it's just like, the shuttle or whatever. I don't know. There's that. I mean, travel's gotten easier, all that stuff. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much that will continue. Oh, I think the bigger thing though is going to be the fact that you have more accountability for officials. I think all these monitoring, like the monitoring of officials and the accountability there is really, I think, is a big factor in decreasing home field advantage, because I think a lot of it comes from referee bias. And I think we're going to see, if we have games without fans, personally, I think home field advantage will be greater than people think. I think you'll see the officiating bias disappear. It should, if there's no fans in the stands, or if there's socially distanced fans, maybe it'll be mostly disappeared. But you'll still have the whole familiarity aspect, the travel, all that stuff. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but home field advantage, I'm sure you do. Home field advantage is stronger early in the game, and that's a phenomenon that exists across sports. If you look at baseball, it's strongest in the first inning. Football, it's strongest in the first quarter. Basketball, strongest in the first quarter. And psychological research has shown, or has posited, I guess, that it comes from this sort of the way your body adjusts to a new environment, to an unfamiliar circumstance, and it takes time to acclimate to it. And then once you do that, then you kind of get to that sort of new normal.
Yeah, I think playing in front of your home fans gets you juiced at the start. It's not sustainable to ride that juice for the whole game, but at the start, like, guys, I think at home get a good juice from their own fans, so that makes sense intuitively, for sure.
That seems like it. I mean, but if you look at it, I mean, if you look at home field advantage, and there's a lot of people that say, oh, these teams have a weak home field, these teams have a stronger home field. And I looked into that. I think it was like 5 years ago. I actually looked and built, sort of, it was a mixed effects model to like find these sort of, see if home field really was different for certain teams than other teams, like persistently. And I did find that overall there was essentially, there was a distribution that it wasn't like that had some significance. But the problem was, when projecting that into the future, it didn't have any predictive value. You could say that in this particular season, this last 5 years, this team has had a home field advantage that is greater, and it seems more than just due to randomness. But if you look at the next year after this, or the next 5 years, that doesn't have any predictive power that it's going to continue, which could be an argument for the fact that the causes behind a team having a greater home field advantage than another are not, it's not just the stadium or the team. It could be something that is unique to that team in a particular year or years. Maybe but I tend to think that overall, I mean, it's not like just because you're a bad team, your home field advantage is going to be bad. People it feels like teams talk about home field advantage much more for good teams. They say, the Saints are 8-0 in the Superdome, or, and it's all, but it's like, well, yeah, but they're also good away. Right.
Right.
And so, and the Jaguars might not have any fans, but, they're still playing at home. And it isn't I really believe it's not, fans aren't causing the home field advantage. And I don't know what sort of effect attendance, I would be interested to know if there's an effect sort of between the rowdiness of a crowd and attendance and that kind of thing on sort of referee bias. That'd be something very interesting for someone to study, because that would make a little bit of sense. But my guess is that the effect, it's not like a 1-to-1 type thing,
Sure. Yeah. And I also think that in football, especially, like, fans can cause more false starts. I think data has shown on the opposing team and stuff
Seattle.
like that. So yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely stuff like that, and that's unique to football, I think, as well.
And you can model that out. You can say, okay, how much is a false start worth, in EPA, and say, okay, well, this is based on false starts. Seattle's home field advantage should be like 0.15 points more or something like that.
Yeah.
If you want. Although then you can go deeper and say, well, the communication means they're in less optimal plays, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it's never ending.
All right. We've gone long enough here without getting to the listener questions. Producer Luke, go ahead and hit the theme music. All right. We're going to do 6 questions here. Question 1 comes from Ben Battle. He says, as a bettor, why does Rufus love the Pinnacle market setter high volume, low margin model when it eliminates market volatility and forces you more directly to compete with sharps? Wouldn't you be richer if Pinnacle never existed and square books had to originate for themselves? I think I know the answer to this, but go ahead, Rufus.
Well, I think Squares, I mean, I can't really imagine what it'd be like with squares just originating from themselves. I mean, you're still going to have the same process of price discovery in a way somehow. Whether there's a Pinnacle or not, there's going to be some book that moves more aggressively. Personally, I like the model because it allows me to be able to bet more money in general. And so I think if it was, 10 years ago or 11 or 12 years ago, I probably, I wouldn't like it as much from just my self-interest, because I'd be, if I'm betting props and other stuff like that, then yeah. But I think I would like the opportunity to compete with sharps and to be able to get money down and be, to get more money down, and rather than just being limited and being forced to, have difficulty trying to get a big position on an event.
Yeah, I mean, just to me, it seems obvious. Like this, if the square books are the ones originating, that doesn't mean they're going to let Rufus bet. That doesn't mean they're going to let anybody, bet more than $500 or whatever. It doesn't mean they're going to take all kinds of action. Okay, question 2 from
Adam. You had a much better answer than I did there. You're right. It's literally it's not like one or the other. It's like
right. Question 2 comes from Noah Rudell. He says, "Does Rufus have his sense of taste back yet after his experience with COVID-19?" Yeah, Rufus went public. He was infected with the coronavirus. How's your health, Rufus? Do you have your sense of taste back yet?
My health is good, and I do. And I thought, honestly, looking back, I was like, wait, maybe why would I like panned meals that I cooked? I was like, man, this is awful. I don't know why this tastes so bad. And it turns out it wasn't me. So
it's scary, but yeah. Question 3 comes from Scott Jones. He says, "Where can we find value in the Champions for Charity golf match?" I saw the latest line. I'm sure you can find a better line than this, but the latest line I saw on Canby was Tiger Peyton minus 195, Phil Mickelson and Tom Brady plus 165.
So first off, Adam, what's the format? Is it skins? I have not really looked into it much. Is it just I think is it alternate shot? I think the format will dictate that. I mean, my guess would be in general, something like this, if there's a big price, like this seems to be a fairly big price. I think that it's more likely there's value on the dog there, just because especially after a long layoff for Tiger and Phil. I mean, we don't know how much they've been practicing, although I guess Tiger does live on a golf course. So I should expect it. And knowing what we do about Tiger's work ethic, he's probably been playing. But the other thing is, I think that this is kind of a made for TV event. So I think they want to keep it kind of close. Do you remember the match 2 years ago? I guess it was.
No, I'm not that into golf like you guys are, but yeah.
Like Tiger literally conceded an 8-foot putt to tie the match or something like that. Right. It was like they wanted an overtime hole, and so would kill me. That would kill me so hard if I bet it. Yeah. So I mean, I think there's other things there, and I mean, I don't know who's better between Peyton Manning or Tom Brady. I mean, but I'm probably not going to be betting it. But
yeah,
if I would say that I would guess that the plus 165 had value, or more value than minus 195.
Sure. Question 4 comes from friend of the show, Thomas Fuller. He says, "What is currently the most efficient way to make money betting on the NFL?" I think this is kind of a loaded question because it depends what your bankroll is, how much, if you're a professional, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, you can answer this however you want. The most efficient way to make money betting on the NFL right now.
I was going to say what's efficient. Yeah, exactly what you were going to say. What's efficient is going to be different for different people, and depends on how you define it. If efficiency is dollars earned per hour spent, for me, it's more efficient to focus on betting full game stuff. If it's highest ROI, looking at small markets and props makes sense. So I would say if you have a smaller bankroll, focusing on props and derivative type bets and things like that makes the most sense. If you have, I don't think if you have a larger bankroll and are limited and can't bet the props and all that stuff, then I mean, I guess the other alternative is betting on sides and totals, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Or playing DFS where
Oh, good point.
You won't be limited, but yeah, I don't.
So wait, before we move on, Adam, what is actually, you can answer this after the podcast if you'd like. But I'm curious, what are, the best DFS players, like for tournaments, like what is their expectation, like ROI on an entry?
Oh yeah. So I've talked about this a ton. And when you were talking about, I meant to bring this up when you were talking about, like the touts and exposing them. And I've like been so transparent with my results. Like I tried to post them, and not because like, I want to show, or it does. I post them literally so people know, like somebody like me who's trying really, really, really hard, what a realistic ROI is. And like for me, in cash, I've ranged anywhere from like 8% up to like 18% over the last few years. I think the best players in tournaments can generate a little bit more than that, but also, people are playing incredible amounts of volume. I think I've seen really good players post like 10% ROIs and stuff like that. And so like, yeah, when somebody comes, my point is like, to show that is when somebody comes and tells you that like, we're going to make 80%, it's like, they're just straight lying. That was the point you were trying to make too about all the sports betting touts saying I've gone 49-1 in my last 50 plays. Like anybody, like people like me and you trying to say what our results are, not to brag or anything, just to say this is what's realistic, I think makes a difference,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me looking at, I mean, you have people that are really successful, like the Chalupa or Chipotle brothers or whatever it is. That, and I always wonder how much of that, like, I'm sure they're very good. I always wonder like how much of it is variance versus how much of it is actually skill. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you look at the person, let's say if you found the top DFS player of the year, I don't care what year it is, like I would anticipate the next year their ROI was going to be worse, right? I mean, just because, if you're looking at the extremes, it's likely that there was a lot of positive variance in general.
Yeah.
So
one way to look at it in DFS, if you're a tournament player, would be like, how many times did I give myself a chance to get first place in a tournament? In other words, how many times was I in the 0.01 or the 0.1 top percent of a tournament? And whether I got first is going to be a huge difference between first, second, third, fourth, fifth. But how many times did I get myself into a position to be in like the top 10 in one of these tournaments? That's true. And I think that would be a more realistic way.
Yeah, the way the payouts are structured, there's just so much variance at the tournament play. But 8 to 18% for cash games seems quite good. Quite good.
Yeah, and I'm also game selecting really hard too. I'm not like taking on all comers in head to head, but I'm not playing like the high stakes 50-50s and stuff.
Playing
like
the 25-cent ones?
No.
That's where the ROI is probably, right?
Probably.
That's probably going to be your most efficient way on an ROI basis, right?
For sure. Okay. Question 5 from John Morgan. He says, what's your process when creating NFL season simulations? Is it feasible to simulate an individual NFL game to support betting decisions? And are there other quantitative methods besides simulation to determine soft lines?
So I'll start with the middle question, I guess. I think it is feasible, but very difficult to simulate an NFL game. I know that there are people that do that. There's people that like we're simulating on the level of like left tackle versus defensive end matchup, like who wins that block. I do not do that. I don't simulate individual games. I simulate beyond just simulating the outcome, like the actual score differential for season simulations. So my process for season simulations is that I have my expectation going to the game. I flip a unfair coin or whatever with the probability. Like I end up sampling from a distribution of potential outcomes. And then I record the result and adjust team ratings based off of that with a lot of uncertainty there. Basically, I'm modeling the dynamic nature of team ratings. You could be a 3-point favorite and win a game by 7, but still end up have your rate. You could still end up having your rating get slightly worse, maybe if you won the turnover battle 4-0 or something like that. Or you could, have your team's rating really improve. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is understanding that sort of dynamic uncertainty and modeling that in is super important. So that's my process for NFL simulations, and obviously keeping track of the hard part is the intensive part is keeping track of all these common record against common opponents and all that stuff. Each simulation have to record all that stuff to be able to handle those tiebreakers.
Sure.
Are there other quantitative methods to determine soft lines? Yes, definitely. I don't think it's just simulation. I think you can do a lot in terms of just using statistical inference and just building models too. And
Cool.
that's what I'm doing. I'm building models and then simulating based on the models.
Right. All right. Last question. We're going to let Rufus go after this from A Burke 9580. Were his parents actually awesome enough to name him Rufus Peabody, or is that just a stage name?
A lot of I don't know how many times people have told me how surprised they are that it's actually my real name. And my parents' friends apparently tried to they had staged an intervention to try to talk them out of naming me Rufus. But I'm very happy to be Rufus Peabody on my birth certificate and everything.
There you go. Congratulations. All right. We learned a lot here today. Really appreciate your time. Tell the people where they can find you, what you're working on, anything else you want to say.
You can find my podcast, which Jeff Ma and I co-host, called Bet the Process, wherever you get your podcasts. We release that once a week during the NFL season, and generally once a week, once every 2 weeks-ish during the off season where we have guests. Let's see, Twitter, I'm at Rufus Peabody, though I've been kind of quiet there recently, trying to be more productive, and that's that's what's going on.
What about any update on the coalition?
The coalition, American Bettors Coalition. We are kind of on pause a little bit right now. We aren't doing any. We're not launching. We're still we're kind of waiting until sports pick up and we're in a better economic situation before we actually do an official launch, because like any nonprofit, we need money to actually be able to run. And I don't think most operators right now and other parties don't really have the money for that. But you can visit I got to remember what our website is actually. I think it's American Bettors, American Bettors Coalition .com. No, .org. Hold on. I don't want to. I'm literally Googling it right now. I should know this. American Bettors Coalition.org. There you go.
.org. There you go.
And we have a Twitter, I think, which is at American Bettor, I believe. These are things I should know, but it's been a while. So there's a form on the American Bettors Coalition site where to sort of stay in touch, and also if you're interested in volunteering, where we'd love for you to fill it out and let us know what you're interested in, what your skill sets are, and all that stuff. And so once we get going, American Bettors Coalition is literally, we want to be the sort of the voice of sports bettors in the legal in the legal sports betting ecosystem. And because right now the people writing the legislation are not really, they're being lobbied by these B2Bs, by operators, by leagues, but nobody's really there representing us, the bettor. And this is not, contrary to what some people think, this is not an association for professional bettors or anything like that. It's literally, it's about creating laws and that are fair for bettors, that respect, problem gamblers that do not take advantage of them, and that are fair to everybody.
Yeah. No, it sounds like good cause, and I hope wish you a lot of luck with it, because you're right, the actual bettors are severely underrepresented in this process as sports betting spreads across the United States. All right. Follow Rufus on Twitter, listen to Bet the Process, join the coalition, et cetera, et cetera. Rufus, thank you for your time. For Rufus, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.